So, about this time last week, the Food and Drug Administration released its final historic ruling on over the counter hearing aids, affording millions of Americans the opportunity to access hearing devices without the need to see a licensed professional. My guests today are no strangers to delivering hearing care treatment to Americans through these direct access channels. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time today. Nick, let's start with you. If you could share a little bit about yourself with the audience, that would be great.
I'm Nick Klopper. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company by the name of Hearix. We also have a direct-to-consumer and soon-to-be OTC brand by the name of Lexi Hearing. We're a spin-out from Ivy League University, playing in both the B2B and B2C space, where we develop disruptive technologies for both the enterprise customer and end consumer.
Yeah, and also with us today is Andy Sabin. Andy's at Bose. Andy, if you'll share a little bit about yourself, please.
Yeah, sure. I've been at Bose for about 8 years, and before that, I had a small startup called Ear Machine, and our goal was to enable some of the OTC hearing aid stuff that is just hitting the news this week or last week. So I'd have a PhD in communication sciences and disorders from Northwestern, had the startup, and then I've been working at Bose for 8 years, and my current role is a research franchise lead. So we have very few franchises in our research group, and I run our franchise that has to do with hearing the world around you. And of course, I'm tied into quite a bit of our partnership work, and so I get the pleasure of talking to Nick on a fairly regular basis.
Yeah, and I'm excited about one, the new rules that have come out, and number two, you guys are pioneers in this space. So I'm really curious to hear your thoughts, especially as it relates to those new guidelines on the consumer side. So, gentlemen, any thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing is just yay. We've been waiting for this for a while, right? It's a couple of years late, which was unfortunate, but we're just happy that it's final. And I think that a lot of us have been speculating about what this market is going to look like once it opens up, and that's all speculation. We're actually going to see. We're going to find out. I think it's like 50-ish days from now, the market opens, and we're really hopeful. The thing that's motivated a lot of us for a long time is just helping more people here, right? There's the adoption rates in the U.S. are not great. And we think that bringing down the price and making it more accessible is going to bring new people into the market. That's been the hypothesis all along. And finally, we're going to get some real world market evidence to see if that actually changes adoption. So I'm just eager to see what happens. It's been a long time, and I really hope that it just helps a lot of people who wouldn't have been able to hear better actually have access to a real solution.
Yeah. Nick, anything that you'd add to that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely resonate with Andy's sentiment around, increasing access. I think that's the main reason the bill was passed, right? And the ruling is now out, is to increase that access and affordability. I do also appreciate that I think there's going to be a lot of education required to the end consumer now that the rules are out. Of course, I think all of the players in the space now, us combined with Bose, hope that this will just be like, fireworks from day one. I still appreciate that we're working with a slightly older demographic. Would they feel comfortable purchasing these devices, in store, potentially online? And what do we need to do as companies to make that a safe and enjoyable experience? And I think it all comes down to our execution. And I think the FDA did a great thing, specifically in the self-fit category, to require a 510K, just also making sure that we have reputable companies that play in this space.
Yeah, and I appreciate what both of you have said. And if you also look at it from the supplier side, we just don't have enough providers to handle all of the people that need our help. So, the segmentation was forthcoming. I mean, it was inevitable. The evolution of the profession is going to push us in different directions. And now that we're here, what I'm really excited about is the way that you all are starting to share the information, the education, the opportunities, the accessibility for consumers who want to take the bull by the horns and help themselves in areas that may be rural where they don't have provider care, or for those individuals who the sticker price of a $6,000 set of devices is maybe a little overwhelming, and maybe they want to dabble a little bit to see what their value is before they move forward with professional care. So, Lexi Lumen has partnered with Walgreens. And so, Nick, can you talk a little bit about how that trajectory happened and what that looks like?
Yes, thanks. So this started about 18 months ago in one or two pilots we ran with Walgreens around specifically testing how the consumer would react to once the OTC legislation comes out, right? How would they perceive in-store purchasing, online purchasing, and what that journey could look like, right? So numerous types of small pilot tests isolated, in one or two stores, and then as well online to see what we can and can't do, what the typical messaging needs to be to the consumer to make them feel safe, and how do they respond to the typical price points. I don't say we have it right today, but I think we have a very good understanding of, what the consumer is looking for and what is important. And one thing that we have found is the importance of a human in the process. As much as OTC, we think, is just a product on the shelf and will people just take that home. I think that's kind of a tainted view on what this category could be. And that could be the reason, it could be the reality for lower priced products. But for definitely the more premium self-fit category, we have seen that kind of human engagement, either through the pre-sale process or post-sale, where they actually have specific questions about the hearing aids, has been instrumental in driving customer satisfaction ratings.
Yeah, and I find that an important point that you just made, as providers, and I know we'll talk about this a little bit later. One of the things that providers are concerned about is where's their place in this space. And there's always going to be a place because people need the support in order to overcome the issues that they're facing. The product alone is not going to do it, because if that was the case, the silver bullet on the market today would have already handled the situation that we're in. So getting back to Lexi Lumen here at the Walgreens, at the pharmacy here, you've got some services that are associated with it. You've got a hearing test and some other things. Can you share a little bit about that aspect with the viewers who may not be quite well versed in your product and your services?
Yes, so it all depends on kind of if you differentiate between an in-store and online experience. So, of course, online, we have a lot more flexibility with what we offer the consumer. And I think if you think about OTC, people think about that convenience factor, that ability for them not to have to go to a provider to get basic understanding. And one of that, of course, is their ability to understand what their hearing capabilities are like. Do they have a hearing loss, or what their severity of the hearing loss is? So one of the things we implemented with Walgreens is through their Find Care experience is an online hearing assessment. So it's very proprietary to Heurix. We use a signal to noise ratio test, which is called digits and noise. We present digits and background noise. A consumer can then do that from their phone or from their laptop in the convenience of their home, and do a hearing assessment to first establish if they would be a candidate to benefit from a hearing aid. And we've seen that a very nice step in the user journey, and which normally, would have been fulfilled by the audiologist, of course, a much more comprehensive test, diagnostic tests and bone conduction and ear conduction. And we're not trying to replace that, but we're trying to give that consumer guidance about what their hearing ability could look like. And what we have found very fascinating is we asked the question about self-perceived hearing loss at the beginning of that test for the consumer to tell us, do they think they have a hearing loss? And then, we correlate that back to, do they actually have a hearing loss in the end, right? And it's uncanny how correlated they are. All right. And I think that's definitely the first step, is just to confirm that suspicion that that consumer might have in that journey.
Yeah, that's interesting, because we know that as self-perception increases, the likelihood of adoption goes up. And so are you seeing, as people have more of a severe loss, they're more likely to engage with your product? Are you seeing anything like that? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's fascinating, the data, right? And I think we can have a 2-hour conversation on this specific topic. But what has been fascinating to us is there is a correlation between the severity of the hearing loss and their willingness to take action. We actually asked this readiness of stage of readiness question to customers. You have a hearing loss. What is your readiness to change, right? And I mean, we all know from literature that a typical customer or member that finds out that they have a hearing loss normally takes about 7 years to take action, right? And I think we all think that OTC is just going to change that overnight. I don't think that's going to be. All we can do is try to shorten that, right? And I don't think that we know, is the 7 years due to stigma? Is it denial? Is it price point? Is it access? Or is it a combination of all of those, right, that drives that 7 years for them to take action? But you're correct. There is definitely a correlation to the severity of the hearing loss and their willingness to take action. And what we have seen is also the severity of the hearing loss to what customers are willing to pay. So customers definitely in the mild to moderate category versus that severe hearing loss, definitely willing to pay more, because I think that it has just amplified the challenge that they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And so that's on the front end. So that's really interesting. But that's on the front end. On the back end, are you seeing folks call into your support group and asking for help, or how's that playing out?
Yes, I mean, I think we've been speaking about that, pre-sale journey till now, right? So kind of confirming the hearing loss, and then getting the hearing aids into the consumer's hands, right? Either that being from an in-store purchase or that being from an online.com purchase. I think we spoke about the involvement of a human in the process and kind of the role of the provider, the audiologist, right? And I think what makes the Lexi platform so unique, and that's why our partnership with Bose is so valuable to us, is we have built a platform, and we see Lexi as a platform in which the Lumen, the new Lexi powered by Bose B1 product lives, where you have the ability to not just set up your hearing aid, but then also have access to a range of services. One of them, of course, includes Lexi Care, which is then a team of Lexi experts, which then can guide you remotely through a video or voice call with specific amendments that you need to make to your hearing aid, which is then, of course, trained on the product that can assist you, kind of putting that, expert care in your pocket. We also have a rewards program called Lexi Rewards, where customers are then onboarded into the hearing aid, how to take care of it, what's the best use, how long should I be wearing it, how do I clean my hearing aid, all those typical things that a professional would teach you, in the first 30, 50 or 100 days of use. And then, of course, the ability to track the customer success so that we can preemptively step in should the customer experience any challenges with sound quality or experience in certain environments through that kind of contact and support center.
Yeah, and what I really love is it's just not picking a product off the shelf and putting it in your ears. You guys have actually built out a model, and I think people need to appreciate and understand the fact that this model exists, and it gives credence to the whole process that's necessary. So again, it's not just buying the product, there's also help that's necessary. And again, kudos to you and your team for putting all that together, because I think that's a great win-win. Not only for accessibility, but also for usage, which we know is also an issue, even for people who go see a regular provider. They end up in the drawers because they don't have the support that they always need.
Just really quickly,
Sure.
say that what Nick just said is really what made them such an appealing partner for Bose, right? Hearing aids are a hard business. It's complicated from a patient perspective. It's complicated from a regulatory perspective. I think there's still a lot to be learned in terms of the sort of digital first approach for a hearing aid market. And we've just been really impressed with the work that HearX/Lexi has done in this space. And we think that they're sort of adding a really important layer to the hearing aid experience that really ensures some customer success.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, Andy, I think the key thing here is what you just pointed out, is they've built out this process. So it's going to be interesting to see what other folks do, because I think, HearX has built out the gold standard, so to speak, at this point in time. What are other companies going to do? So, for example, there's talk of consumer electronics companies coming to the marketplace. Are they just going to simply dump their products on the market and expect that people are going to purchase them? I think to some extent you're going to get tech-savvy folks that will. But at the end of the day, there's such a wide spectrum, because now we're seeing 4 generations of people with hearing impairment. That's a first. And so, your millennials may be a little more tech savvy, where, my dad, who's in a silent generation group, needs a little more help. And then you've got these folks in between with the baby boomers and the Gen X and the Gen Ys. And so the segmentation that I alluded to a little bit earlier, that fork in the road is actually going to really expand. And I think you guys have the right initial steps as this fork starts to evolve, because it's going to fan out in some capacity. And so, Bose was one of the first companies to actually have with the ear machine, which I got to play with when I was in an academic setting, one of the first components of this. And it's evolved. And it's evolved relative to this fan that's coming out. So can you talk a little bit about that, Andy? Because I've seen that evolution with your product.
Yeah, sure. For those who don't understand, who aren't familiar with Ear Machine, this is it goes back at least, almost 10 years now. But the idea was to try to figure out what's the simplest interface that still ensures that users can get a setting that's appropriate for them and their hearing loss. And so if you see the app that controls the Lexi B1, it has two sliders on it. One's called World Volume, one's called Treble Bass. And the world volume is sort of deceptively simple, right? It's not just a volume control. What it's actually doing is choosing prescriptions that are appropriate for the most common hearing losses. So it's sort of like a presbyacusis slider, where if you move it towards the bottom, it's choosing targets, wide dynamic range compression targets for a mild hearing loss. And as you go up, it becomes closer to the moderate range. And then the treble bass is sort of trying to mimic what happens in fine tuning, or at least a portion of what happens in fine tuning in the audiology clinic, where patients say it's too boomy, it's too tinny, and they can sort of just sort of adjust the spectral slope to their liking. And it's one thing to just sort of have an idea, but we've also tested it scientifically. We've run a clinical study at Northwestern. There's a paper published, I think it was 2020, in Trends in Hearing about it. But we let people actually take it out into their lives, listen to the settings that they chose, compare it to the settings that would have been chosen for them, using best practices from the audiology, from an audiology clinic. And when people listen to those differences in the field, it seems like they tend to like the settings that they chose for themselves, actually a little bit more even than what the audiologist would have chosen for them. So we've done the work to really vet out that this thing works. And hey, look, there have also been two products on the market that use this mapping, right? We had Bose Hearphones back in 2017, and then Bose Sound Control last year. And you just look at the ratings. It's a pretty well-rated product. And one thing that people often call out is the simplicity and the efficacy of that interface. So it's a really, to users, it's just like, controls that they would see on their consumer electronics products, right? A volume and a treble bass. But behind the scenes, it's doing quite a bit more. And it seems like it actually works for, most sort of typically shaped hearing losses.
Yeah, and Andy, just for the audience, if I remember right, these are connected using, is it Bluetooth headphones, or can you expand on that?
So it's just the control of the hearing aid is through Bluetooth. So you use the Lexi app, fiddle with the wheels, and that sends data to the hearing aid, which then updates all of the parameters that control wide dynamic range compression.
Okay. And I was going back to the Ear Machine when we actually used, I think it was the hardwired headphones, because this was back in 2013, I think, or something like that, when we first
back in ancient history, when the iPhone actually had a headphone jack. You can still use it with a dongle, but it's a non-optimal experience. I recommend the Lexi product.
So let's talk a little bit about this partnership now. So we've got the HearX component and how you guys are doing this online. You've got a product in which people can self-fit this, and the evidence shows that they're able to do it. So what is this partnership now that you all have created?
So, it's really off to a flying start. Of course, we've been connected with Bose since 2019, where we've kind of assisted Bose in their aspirations of kind of launching their first product in the market. We've developed, an online hearing assessment for them. So I think we've come a long way with Bose, and I think that relationship has just fostered over time. And what's really, from a Lexi perspective, exciting to us is, of course, not just the credibility that the Bose brand has got in the market, but also the audio quality and sound engineering, that I've put into the product, the build quality of the product, the look, the feel. That's really the strong suit that Bose brings, right? And I think when we pair that consumerism and touch and feel of the product, the audio quality, with the audiological experience that HearX has got and which you've built into the Lexi platform, I really think those two combined is what kind of puts us, definitely at the front, definitely in the current space, to have a very strong competing product in the market.
I just want to echo everything that Nick said, and I want to underscore it. Like, hearing is still really important to Bose, despite what you may have read in the press. And our partnership with Lexi is maybe the best statement of that. Where we have one product out, and we're looking forward to doing even more with them. We think that there's a nice complementary relationship between them, where we have some really nice technology, they have a really nice platform, and combined, we really think we could help a whole lot of people with hearing loss.
Yeah, and that brings up an interesting point here. So you're going to eventually come out with new products. Right now, there's the Lumen and there's the B1 device. So how does somebody decide between A or B? How does that happen? Or do they both work for the same category of individuals?
Great. So, I think it's two completely different experiences. And I think consumers, specifically now in the OTC market, is looking for choice. And they differ where the Lumen customer are looking for a more automated experience, whereas the Powered by Bose customer is looking for that customization, which we spoke about, the ear machine technology which they bring. And I think that all plays into how wide the OTC category will be for customers. And I think that the idea is that they will have choice, and then they would choose the product that's best suited for them.
All right, gentlemen. So what's the future going to hold for us? We've talked about what the bill is. You guys have some amazing products that are out on the market for the consumer. So as a provider, should I sell these in my practice is probably one question that folks are asking themselves. I think the second question is if someone comes in with this product, how do I help them? And then the third thing that I'll ask you is, what's next?
So maybe to the question of should I sell this? Of course, the answer is yes. No bias here. What can you do? I think there's a lot of innovation going on the provider level. I think Amin and you and I have a lot of shared contacts of people who are trying to rethink how audiologists kind of structure their businesses. Unbundling, of course, is the key word. But look, there's a ton of value that audiologists provide, and that can totally apply to adding value to the OTC space. Education, maintenance, even if they wanted to do some real ear fitting, you could put a probe mic in with these products and tell you where an audiologist would have said it. That might be really valuable to users. So I think, for audiologists who are open to it, I think there's a real lot of opportunities. What happens next? I don't know. I think I've been consistently wrong about what's going to happen in terms of the regulations and the market developments. I think we're going to have to listen to the customers. I think we're all going to be paying really close attention once these OTC regs are actually live again, which is in October. Looking for any signal in the market, and we will try to iterate based on what people actually want, and we'll respond to them.
Yeah, I wanted to just I resonate 100% with Andy's saying. I will bring a bit of a different perspective on almost the same sentence. Is I think the advantage of the OTC legislation coming into effect in a couple of, less than 2 months from now is I think there's going to be a lot of awareness creation, and that all around for both the consumer will be fantastic, but of course the audiologist and the provider, that's also going to be fantastic. And I think there's been a very strong view from the FDA and the OTC legislation around what types of consumers this category will be going after, right? And I do think that it's those customers top of funnel. And I think over time, those customers, I don't think people need a hearing aid tomorrow, won't need one, in 5 or 10 years from now, and could end up at the provider either, getting a much more powerful device that fits kind of their hearing requirements at that stage. And if we think the US, globally is still one of the most penetrated markets, but still are highly unpenetrated, I think there are massive growth and awareness creation that's required now. And I think also, I hope that this OTC legislation will also play a big role in kind of destigmatizing hearing loss, which I think is a big challenge we have to overcome.
Yeah, gentlemen, I've really enjoyed this. I think there's a lot of perspective here. Of course, there's a lot of unknowns. We may have to circle back in time and maybe revisit this video to see what we said and what actually happened down the road. But again, I'm really excited. I really think that the products that you guys have out on the market benefit everybody, including the providers, especially the patients. And at the end of the day, it's a win-win for everybody. So thank you for all that you guys do, and best of luck. And, again, let's circle back and see what happens.